An American young woman fixed a machine that 15 German engineers failed to. Emily Johnson watched in despair as 15 of the best engineers from New York declared there was nothing more to be done. The machine that produced parts for hospital equipment had completely stopped, and with it the future of 300 families who depended on that factory in Allentown. That's when the 24-year-old daughter of a worker who had sacrificed everything so she could study asked for permission to examine the equipment. The engineer's laughter echoed through the Keystone manufacturing warehouse like a cruel sentence. "The intern wants to take a little look," mocked Richard Thompson, the chief engineer, a 50-year-old man who never missed a chance to humiliate her. "Girl, this isn't a toy. Go back to your spreadsheets." Emily felt her face burn with shame, but she didn't lower her eyes. Behind her, her father, Robert Johnson, 58, wiped his grease-stained hands on his blue overalls. He had worked at that factory for 30 years, ever since he arrived from Scranton with his pregnant wife and the dream of giving his daughter a better life. "Mr. Richard, with all due respect, I know this machine better than anyone," said Robert, his voice trembling but firm. "My daughter grew up around here, always been good with these things." The factory director, George Williams, a 62-year-old man with graying hair, checked his wristwatch impatiently. Keystone Manufacturing was facing the biggest crisis in its history. Without that machine running, they wouldn't be able to fulfill their contract with New York Children's Hospital, which depended on the parts to maintain the equipment that saved children's lives. "Look, Robert, I respect you, but the situation is too serious," said George, running a hand through his hair. "If we don't fix this in 48 hours, we'll have to shut down. I've already gotten 3 offers to buy the land this morning." Emily's heart raced. Closing the factory meant 300 families would lose their jobs in a town already struggling with unemployment. It meant her father, who was already dealing with high blood pressure and diabetes, wouldn't be able to afford his expensive medication. It meant his dream of seeing her graduate as an engineer would become impossible. "Mr. George, just give me 2 hours, Emily pleaded, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "If I can't at least identify the problem, I promise I won't bother you again." Richard let out a bitter laugh. 2 hours? Girl, we've spent 3 whole days here. We brought technicians from New York, Chicago, even Pennsylvania. This machine just locked up, and there's nothing left to do. But George, who had known Robert since he started as a worker, saw something in the young woman's eyes that made him hesitate. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was the memory of how Robert had saved the factory from a fire years ago, risking his own life. "All right," he finally said, 2 hours. But if you can't do it, understand there are no miracles left here. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Emily approached the machine with her heart pounding. It was a massive piece of equipment, the size of a car, full of complex parts and tangled cables like a web. She had grown up watching that machine work, listening to its constant hum like background music in her childhood. When she was 10, she used to sit in the corner of the warehouse doing her homework while waiting for her father to finish his shift. That's how she learned to recognize every sound, every vibration, every sign that something wasn't right. "Dad, do you remember that time, about 5 years ago, when the machine started making a strange noise and you said it was like it had a headache?" asked Emily, placing her hand on the cold metal. Robert stepped closer, his face lined with worry. "I do remember, sweetheart. It was a different hum, kind of muffled." "Why?" "Because now it's making the same noise, just quieter. Like it's whispering instead of shouting." Richard rolled his eyes. "What lovely poetry, but machines don't whisper. They either break or work." Emily ignored the comment and began inspecting each part of the equipment. Her fingers moved over the cables with a gentleness that impressed even the most skeptical engineers. She didn't have their degrees, but she had something decades of study couldn't teach: intuition. As she worked, she remembered the nights she'd spent helping her father study the machine manuals. Robert had only finished middle school, but his thirst for knowledge amazed her. He kept every scrap of paper, every technical drawing, like they were treasures. "The answer is here somewhere," Emily murmured to herself. That's when she heard a voice behind her. "Sweetie, can I make a suggestion?" Emily turned and saw Mrs. Margaret, a 65-year-old woman who'd worked in factory cleaning for 40 years. Her grey hair was tied in a simple bun, and her calloused hands held a bucket and a rag. "Of course, Mrs. Margaret. I don't understand any of this complicated stuff, but cleaning here every day you notice things others don't." Richard huffed impatiently, but George motioned for her to continue. "This machine always ran just fine, but lately, every time I came to clean in the afternoon, it made a different noise. Only after 2 o'clock, when the sun hit that window over there hard," Mrs. Margaret said, pointing to a high window in the warehouse. Emily followed the woman's gaze and noticed something no one had considered. The afternoon sunlight shone directly on a specific part of the machine, where an electronic control panel was located. "Mrs. Margaret, you're a genius," Emily said, rushing to the panel. Carefully, she removed the protective cover and found exactly what she suspected. The circuits were overheating from direct sun exposure. It was a simple problem, but one all the engineers had overlooked, focused on complex solutions. "I can't believe it," muttered one of the younger engineers, Kevin, 30 years old. "It's just a matter of ventilation and positioning." Richard turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous. It can't be that simple." But Emily was already working on the solution. With Robert's help and other workers, she repositioned the panel and installed a sun shield, using materials she found right in the warehouse. "Now let's test it," she said, her hands shaking with nerves. The entire warehouse fell silent as Emily turned on the machine. For a moment that felt like forever. Nothing happened. Then, slowly, the equipment began humming with the familiar sound everyone knew. "It worked!" Robert shouted, hugging his daughter with tears in his eyes. The warehouse erupted in applause. Workers who'd been there for decades cried with relief. Their families wouldn't have to look for jobs in other cities. Their kids wouldn't have to drop out of school. George walked up to Emily with a smile. "Sweetheart, you saved this factory. How can I repay you?" Emily looked at her father, then at Mrs. Margaret, and finally at all the hopeful faces around her. "I'd like to propose something different, Mr. George. How about creating a program where the most experienced workers can teach what they know to the engineers, and the engineers can teach the theory to the workers? That way problems like this won't go unnoticed again." Richard was about to protest, but Kevin, the youngest engineer, spoke up first. "She's right. I have a degree, but I would have never thought to ask Mrs. Margaret about the patterns she observes every day." George thought for a moment, then reached out to Emily. "I accept the proposal, and I want to offer you a scholarship to finish your engineering degree. This factory needs people like you." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears. The dream that had seemed impossible was suddenly within her grasp. "I accept, but on one condition," she said, looking at her father. "My dad will be the supervisor of the new program. No one knows this factory better than him." Robert couldn't contain his emotion. After 30 years as a worker, he would finally be recognized for the knowledge he had accumulated. But the joy didn't last long. The next day, Emily arrived at the factory and found Richard whispering with 2 men in suits in George's office. "What's going on?" she asked Kevin, who looked worried. "I'm not sure, but I heard Richard is trying to convince Mr. George to sell the factory anyway. He says the machine problem was just temporary, and another one will come up soon." Emily's blood ran cold. If the factory was sold, all their effort would have been for nothing. She needed to find out what Richard was plotting. That night, she decided to return to the factory to inspect the machine more closely. She wanted absolute certainty that the problem was fixed. Using the key her father had kept for 20 years, she entered the dark warehouse. That's when she heard voices coming from the office. Richard was on the phone, speaking in a low but irritated tone. "I told you the girl ruined everything. The machine is working again, and now the old man doesn't want to sell." "No, it wasn't luck. She actually figured out the problem." "What do you mean, raise the offer? Do you really want this factory?" Emily hid behind a pillar, her heart racing. Richard was involved in some scheme to force the sale of the factory, but who were the people on the other end of the line? "Look, I tried sabotaging the machine for weeks, but always in ways that looked like natural defects. Shutting off the ventilation system, overloading the circuits. I thought no one would figure out it was intentional. Yes, I need the commission money. My daughter is studying abroad, and tuition is expensive. Emily covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Richard had deliberately sabotaged the machine to force the factory into bankruptcy, and now that she had fixed it, he was desperate. There has to be another way. If you buy the factory when it's bankrupt, you'll get the land for a third of the price. What? More serious sabotage? I don't know. That could land me in jail. Fine. I'll think of something. Emily waited for Richard to leave and ran home. She needed to tell her father everything, but she also needed proof. Her word against a degreed engineer wouldn't carry much weight. The next day, she arrived at the factory determined to expose Richard. But she found an even worse situation. The machine had stopped again overnight, and this time the problem seemed far more serious. How could it have broken again? George asked, visibly shaken. You were sure it was fixed? Emily inspected the machine and found clear signs of sabotage: cut wires, loose screws, deliberately damaged components. Richard had worked overnight to cause damage that would look accidental. Mr. George, I need to speak with you privately, Emily said. In the office, she recounted everything she had heard the night before. George listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly serious. Are you sure about what you're saying, Emily? You're accusing my head engineer of sabotage. I know how it sounds, but I swear it's true. Richard is being paid to destroy the factory. George let out a deep sigh. Even if I believe you, I have no way to prove it. And now, with the machine broken again, the buyers will increase the pressure. Maybe it really is better to sell. Emily felt despair take hold of her. Everything she had fought for was crumbling. Give me one more chance. 48 hours to fix the machine and prove Richard is lying. Emily, I can't take any more risks. Families depend on a safe decision. That's when Robert walked into the office without knocking. Mr. George, let me speak. I've worked here for 30 years, and I've never seen my daughter be wrong when it comes to this factory. If she says there's sabotage, then there is. George looked at the two of them, father and daughter, united by the same determination. All right, 48 hours. But if you can't prove anything, I'll close the deal with the buyers. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Emily knew she had no time to waste. She needed to fix the machine and, at the same time, find a way to prove Richard's sabotage. She started by carefully examining every bit of damage, photographing everything with her phone. Dad, these cuts in the cables are too precise. It's not natural wear and tear, she said, showing him the images. Robert, who had worked with machines his whole life, agreed. This was done with wire cutters. And look, they cut exactly where it would cause the most damage without being obvious. As they worked on the repairs, Emily noticed Richard frequently passing through the warehouse, always with a nervous expression. She needed a strategy to make him confess. Kevin, can you help me with something? She asked the younger engineer. Of course, Emily. What do you need? I want you to tell Richard the machine is almost fixed and that I found some strange evidence in the damage. See how he reacts. Kevin did as she asked and came back with valuable information. He got really nervous and asked what kind of evidence you found. He also said he wants to talk to you about career opportunities at other companies. Emily smiled. Richard was trying to buy her off. That afternoon, Richard approached her with a forced smile. Emily, I have an interesting proposal for you. I know people in New York who would be willing to pay very well for a talented technician like you. What kind of work? Industrial consulting. You'd earn in a month what you make here in a year. You just need to start immediately, today even. Emily pretended to be interested. It's a tempting offer, but first I need to finish repairing the machine. It's a matter of personal honor. Richard's face tightened. Look, Emily, be realistic. This factory is doomed. Even if you manage a temporary fix, more problems will come up. Old machines are like that, always breaking down. How can you be so sure? Richard hesitated for a moment. Experience, kid. Experience. Emily kept working on the machine, but her mind was focused on how to expose Richard. She needed to catch him in the act, or at least make him confess. In the early hours of the morning, she decided to set a trap. She asked Kevin to spread the rumor. that she had discovered a way to make the machine even more efficient, and that she'd test the improvement the next morning. If Richard tried to sabotage it again, she'd be waiting. Emily hid in the warehouse at 4 in the morning, equipped with her phone to record everything. Around 5 o'clock, she heard footsteps. It was Richard, carrying a toolbox. She watched as he carefully dismantled part of the machine he had repaired the day before. Richard worked with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "You can stop right there, Richard," Emily said, stepping out of hiding with her phone still recording. Richard nearly dropped his tools. "Emily, you scared me. I was just checking how to sabotage it again. I recorded everything." Richard looked at the phone, then at the tools in his hands. There was no denying the evidence. "You don't understand, girl. This factory was doomed anyway. I just sped things up." "Why? Why destroy the place you've worked at for 15 years? Richard sat heavily on a crate. "My daughter's studying medicine in London. Tuition is $20,000 a month. My salary doesn't even cover half. The buyers offered me $500,000 in commission if I could force the sale." Emily felt a mix of anger and pity. "And the 300 jobs, the families who depend on this place? I thought they'd be relocated to other companies in the group. At least that's what they told me. And you believed them." Richard lowered his head. "I wanted to believe it. I needed to." Emily had everything she needed to prove the machine's innocence and Richard's guilt. But something in his expression made her hesitate. "Richard, if you confess everything to Mr. George and help fix the damage you caused, maybe we can find a solution for your daughter too." "What do you mean?" "The factory will keep running. Mr. George is a fair man. If you show remorse and competence, maybe he can help with a loan or a raise." Richard looked at her in surprise. "Why would you do that for me, after everything I've done?" "Because I know what it's like to have a father who sacrifices for his children, and because 300 families are more important than personal revenge." An hour later, in George's office, Richard confessed everything. The director listened in silence, his face shifting through several emotions: surprise, anger, disappointment, and finally reflection. "Richard, you betrayed my trust and endangered the livelihoods of 300 families," George said at last. "I know, sir. I have no excuse." "But Emily told me about your family situation. Here's my offer. You'll work for 6 months without pay to make up for the damage you caused. In return, the company will pay your daughter's tuition directly during that time. Afterward, we'll renegotiate your contract with a salary that lets you meet your obligations." Richard began to cry. "Mr. George, I don't deserve your kindness." "It's not kindness, it's justice. Everyone deserves a second chance when they show real remorse." Emily smiled. That was exactly the response she'd hoped for from the director. With Richard now working to fix what he'd broken, the machine was soon running perfectly again. But Emily's problems were far from over. 2 days later, the supposed buyers showed up at the factory. 3 men in suits introduced themselves as representatives of a multinational looking to expand into upstate New York. "Mr. George, even with the machine running, our offer still stands," said the group's leader, a 50-year-old man with a foreign accent. "In fact, we've increased it by 20%. George was confused. "But I thought you were only interested if the factory was struggling." "Our plans have changed. This location is strategic for our business." Emily, who was present at the meeting, felt something wasn't right. "Can I ask what kind of business you plan to develop here?" The man hesitated for a moment. "Production of electronic components for export." "And will you keep the current employees?" "Some will be reassigned." The evasive answer confirmed Emily's suspicions. She excused herself and left the room, heading straight to research the company the men represented online. What she found horrified her. The company had a history of buying traditional factories, firing all the employees, and turning the properties into automated distribution centers. None of the jobs would be saved. Emily rushed back to the office. "Mr. George, I need to speak with you urgently." "Emily, we're in an important meeting." "It's about this meeting. I looked into their company. Every factory they've bought, they fired 100% of the employees within the first month." The 3 men visibly tensed. "Miss, that information is incorrect and—" "I can show you the reports," Emily said, pulling out her phone. "Factory in Rochester, closed in 2019. Factory in Buffalo closed in 2020. Always the same pattern. George stared at the men with a hard expression. Is what she's saying true? The group's leader stood up. Mr. George, our offer expires today. We suggest you think carefully before turning down an opportunity of this magnitude. My answer is no. This factory is not for sale. The men left visibly angry, but Emily knew they wouldn't give up easily. Companies like that had deep pockets and little patience for anyone who got in their way. Mr. George, I think we should prepare for bigger pressures, she said. What kind of pressures? I'm not sure, but people who offer easy money usually don't take no for an answer. Emily was right. The following week, the factory began facing a series of mysterious issues. First, the power started fluctuating, causing minor damage to equipment. Then there were problems with raw material supplies, with vendors cancelling contracts without explanation. This can't be a coincidence, Robert said to his daughter over lunch. I don't think so either. They're trying to force the factory into bankruptcy another way. What do? We fight, Dad, like we always have. Emily began investigating each problem. The power fluctuations weren't due to the public grid, but resulted from illegally installed equipment nearby. The cancelled contracts were due to higher offers made by the same company trying to buy the factory. They're playing dirty, she told George, but two can play that game. What do you have in mind? Let's make the factory indispensable. If we secure better, more stable contracts, it'll be harder to hurt us. Emily remembered a conversation she'd had with a doctor from New York Children's Hospital. He'd mentioned they were looking for a reliable supplier for specific equipment parts, something the factory could easily produce. Mr. George, what if we went straight to the hospital and offered our services? Cutting out the middlemen, we could offer better prices and faster delivery. That's a good idea, but we'd need specific certifications for medical equipment. Leave it to me. I'll research everything we need. Emily spent the next few days studying regulations and contacting certifying agencies. She found the process would be expensive and time-consuming, but not impossible. That's when she had a brilliant idea. What if we started with a partnership? She said to George. We could work as subcontractors for a company that already has the certifications until we get ours. Through Kevin's connections, they managed to arrange a meeting with a company in New York that needed to increase its production capacity. The initial contract was modest, but it represented stability and future growth. When the buyers learned about the new partnership, they made one last attempt to pressure them. This time, it was a visit from union representatives Emily had never seen before. The workers at this factory are being exploited, declared the leader, a burly man speaking in an aggressive tone. We'll organize a strike until their demands are met. Emily asked to speak with the factory workers. Did anyone here ask for union representation? She asked during the impromptu meeting. No, replied Mrs. Margaret. We've always settled everything by talking to Mr. George. Then who are these people? One of the older workers, old Bill, 62 years old, stood up. I know their kind. They're professional agitators. They showed up at the factory where my brother-in-law worked, caused trouble, the company shut down, and they disappeared. Emily's suspicion was confirmed when she discovered the fake union representatives were employees of the same company trying to buy the factory. Enough, she said, calling a meeting with all the workers. You all deserve to know what's happening. At the meeting, Emily told them everything. Richard's sabotage, the forced buyout attempts, the outside pressures. The workers listened in silence, many with growing anger on their faces. So you're telling us for months our factory has been under attack, and we didn't know? Asked old Bill. That's right. But now we know, and we can defend ourselves together. That's when Mrs. Margaret had an idea that surprised everyone. What if we started a movement of our own, a campaign showing how important this factory is to the town? The idea quickly gained momentum. Within days, the workers organized a movement that involved the entire Allentown community. Local businesses, the neighborhood school, even the church joined in to support the factory. 20 families from our school depend on this factory, said the school principal during a meeting in the town square. If it closes, we'll lose many children who'll have to move away. The movement caught the attention of the local press, and soon journalists were interviewing workers and residents. The public pressure forced the buying company to back down completely. "It's not worth facing all this negative exposure," said the buyer's leader during one last tense conversation with George, "but you won't get rid of other interested parties so easily." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. But the threat turned out to be empty. With the new partnership in New York, the factory not only survived but began to thrive. The exchange program between workers and engineers proposed by Emily led to significant improvements in production. "We found 3 ways to increase efficiency just by listening to the suggestions of the senior workers," Kevin reported in a meeting. "Things no manual teaches." 6 months later, Keystone Manufacturing had become a model of participatory management. Companies from other states came to visit, trying to understand how a small-town factory could achieve such impressive results. Emily, now with a full scholarship to finish her engineering degree, divided her time between studies and work at the factory. Her final project would focus on integrating practical and theoretical knowledge in industrial management. "Sweetheart, you've fulfilled a dream I didn't even know I had," said Robert during a workers' celebration barbecue. "What dream, Dad?" "The dream of seeing that everything I worked for my whole life was worth it. Not just for us, but for everyone here." Richard, who had become one of the strongest advocates for the new management system, approached them. "Emily, I want to thank you again. You saved me from a path with no return. How's your daughter? She finished medical school last month. And do you know what graduation gift she asked for? A visit to the factory to meet the person her father says changed his life." Emily smiled. Stories like that were the true reward for the work she had done. But the most emotional moment was yet to come. 2 weeks later, George gathered all the employees in the main warehouse for a special announcement. "I want to tell you that we've received a very different proposal from the previous ones," he said with a mysterious smile. "A university in New York wants to study our management model and is offering a partnership to create a research center right here at the factory." Applause echoed through the warehouse. "But the best part," George continued, "is that they want to offer scholarships to all employees' children who want to study engineering or business." Robert hugged Emily, his eyes filled with tears. "My dear, you didn't just save a factory, you saved the future of an entire generation." Emily looked around and saw hopeful faces, families who now had prospects that once seemed impossible. Mrs. Margaret, who had given the crucial tip about the machine problem, was radiant seeing her 15-year-old grandson excited about the possibility of studying engineering. "Mrs. Margaret, you were the true hero of this story," Emily said. "Oh, nonsense, dear. I just said what I saw every day. You were the one who had the courage to believe and fight." But Emily knew the victory had been collective. Each person had contributed in their own way. Robert with his experience and dedication, Kevin with his open mind to change, Richard with his sincere remorse, Mrs. Margaret with her keen observation, Old Bill with his wisdom, and so many others. The research center opened a year later, with Emily as the technical coordinator. The first group of employees' children began their college studies with scholarship support, creating a virtuous cycle of knowledge and growth. "Do you know what makes me proudest?" George said during the opening ceremony. "It's that we proved it's possible to grow without forgetting where we came from. This factory is stronger today because it values both experience and innovation." Emily, now a certified engineer, looked at the machine she had fixed years ago. It worked perfectly, producing parts that saved lives in hospitals across the country. But more than that, it stood as proof that complex problems sometimes have simple solutions, and wisdom can come from the most unexpected places. "Dad, remember when you said I grew up around this machine?" she asked. "I do, sweetheart. Now I understand it wasn't just the machine that taught me. It was this whole community. Everyone here has valuable knowledge, and the magic happens when we bring it all together." Robert smiled, watching his daughter, who had become not just a skilled engineer but a respected leader and an advocate for the values he had tried to instill his whole life. The factory project gained national attention, and Emily was invited to speak at universities and companies. Her message was always the same. True knowledge comes from the union of theory and practice, degrees and experience, youth and wisdom. "There's no superior or inferior knowledge," she said in her talks. "There's complementary knowledge. An engineer may know how a machine works in theory, but a worker knows how it behaves in practice. Together, they could solve problems they could never tackle alone." The story of Keystone Manufacturing became a case study in business schools, but for Emily, the real lesson wasn't in the books. It was in the transformed lives, the families who found hope, the young people who now had opportunities their parents never had. 5 years later, the factory had become one of the most modern and efficient in upstate New York, yet it never lost its soul. The senior employees were still consulted on improvements, and the younger ones learned that respect and humility are just as important as technical skill. "Emily, can I ask you something?" said Kevin, who was now the technical director. "Of course." "Did you ever doubt you could save the factory?" Emily thought for a moment. "Many times. But then I'd remember my father waking up at 5 in the morning for 30 years to come work here. I'd remember Mrs. Margaret cleaning every corner with care, as if it were her own home. I'd remember all the people who depended on this place, and then I knew I couldn't give up." "And now? What do you feel when you look at all this?" "Gratitude. Gratitude for growing up in a place where I learned that honest work is dignified, that the wisdom of elders is a treasure, and that when people come together for a common goal, no problem is too big to solve." The machine kept running, day after day, producing parts that saved lives. But to Emily, it represented so much more than equipment. It was proof that believing in people, valuing knowledge in all its forms, and fighting for what's right still makes a difference in the world. And every time she walked past the workshop and heard the familiar hum of the machine, she remembered the most important lesson she'd learned. Sometimes the solution we're looking for is right in front of us. We just need the humility to listen and the courage to try. The end. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of perseverance? Leave a comment sharing which part moved you the most. Subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.